Filling a space. Circles, triangles, and squares are plane figures. Spheres, pyramids, and cubes are solid figures. A painter starts with a flat plane, a wall, a piece of paper or cloth, and paints shapes that are supposed to look solid. An artist begins in 2 dimensions, height and width, and creates something that looks like it has 3 dimensions, height, width, and depth. How does a painter make something that looks round or thick or deep or far away? Try this experiment. Look out a window. Some of the things you see are farther away than others. Those things appear smaller and may be partially blocked from your view by other things that are closer to you. You can't see the trees behind your neighbour's house as clearly as you can see the tree in your own yard. The trees far away are not as clear and the colours are not as bright. They seem smaller, even though you know that they are as big as the tree closer up. What you are seeing can be divided into 3 parts. The foreground, the things closest to you like your tree. The background, those things farthest from you like the trees in the back of the house. The middle ground, those things between the foreground and the background. Many paintings also have a foreground, background, and middle ground. For example, let's look at a farm scene called The Gleaners, painted by the French artist Jean-François Millet. The central figures in the painting are 3 women who are gleaning, or gathering what is left in a field after the harvest. Millet makes you focus on the women by placing them in the foreground, larger and more brightly coloured than anything else in the painting. While their faces are not visible, you can see the detail of their clothes and the stalks they hold in their hands. In back of them, in the middle ground, you see a wagon, several large stacks of grain, and many people. There is hardly any detail in these shapes, and their colours are much more pale. They seem little more than dabs of paint. The buildings and trees far in the background are even smaller. They seem out of focus, so pale they seem to fade away. These figures are in the foreground. This wagon and stacks of grain are in the middle ground. These buildings and trees and a person on a horse are in the background. Now let's look at a painting called Peasant Wedding, which gives us a view of a room filled with people. These are peasants, poor farm people, like the women in The Gleaners. Have you ever heard of a wedding in a barn? When the artist Peter Bruegel was painting in Northern Europe, peasant families would hold weddings in barns. Bruegel has kept the picture from looking too crowded by placing people in the foreground, middle ground, and background. What happens to the size of the faces and bodies of the people as you look down the table? Can you see the people waiting to enter the room? Did Bruegel paint them with the same amount of detail as the people in the front? Bruegel has used the brightest colours in the foreground. The colours in the background almost blend with the walls. The bride seated in front of the dark green cloth has pale skin. The hat hanging above her head makes her stand out. To what are the guests paying the most attention? Speaking of space, now let's look at the painting called The Interior of the Pantheon. The Pantheon is a real building in Rome, built by a Roman emperor in the 2nd century AD, with a huge dome ceiling and a window through which you can see the sky. This painting, created by an Italian artist named Giovanni Panini, shows the Pantheon in the 18th century when Panini was alive. Imagine standing in the middle of this room and looking up. You would feel very small. Look how small the artist made the figures in this painting to convey that sense of the space. The vertical lines of the columns lead your eyes upward to the huge curved roof. There, the panels in the dome become smaller and their lines fade into the shadows. The closer they are to the top, the floor is divided into rectangles, and your eye follows the lines of those rectangles to the doorway. There, in the distant background, you see tiny figures walking out through enormous gates. Panini has used lines and shapes, colour and shadow to make a 2-dimensional painting look like a 3-dimensional scene. So high that you see the clouds in the sky, so wide that you see sunlight spreading and many people inside, and so deep that you see far, far away through the gates of the building.